Welcome to a journey into terrifying mysteries that not everyone dares to face. The stories you are about to hear are not just mere crimes, but ghosts wandering through life, wounds that will never heal, and souls that have not found peace. Ordinary people, seemingly harmless, are the ones who cause the worst nightmares. Don't think you're ready, because after hearing these stories, you'll never look at the world around you the same way again. Prepare yourself, for what you're about to hear is not just a story, it's what actually happened. Stories of despair, hatred, and individuals who carry the darkness we can never fully understand. Story 1. The Monster Behind the Mask. I will never forget William, even after all these years. He was an odd student I met at Riverside High School, a large school on the outskirts of Seattle where I grew up. You'd probably think that every school has its share of unusual students, but William was different. He wasn't like the others. He was a mix of darkness and solitude, the haunting presence in a group of students no one dared approach. Looking back, I sat near him in chemistry class during our junior year. Every time the teacher turned to write on the board, I would hear strange whispering coming from behind. The words weren't clear, as if he was talking to himself. Sometimes he would laugh, but it wasn't a joyful laugh. It was a quiet, eerie chuckle, as if he were mocking someone. No one dared say anything, but I could feel the tension in the air. His laugh seemed uncontrollable, and whenever I turned to look, I would catch William's gaze, empty and full of defiance. William was always the target of bullying in class. The kids who picked on him were truly horrible, but no one ever intervened. Part of it was because he never responded or fought back, and part of it was because he never tried to make friends. He was always alone, sitting at the back of the class, sneaking off to the library, and avoiding any kind of eye contact. But what really caught my attention was the drastic change in William during senior year. That's when things started to go too far. He was no longer the lonely kid. William became an angry, unsettling person, and every step he took seemed to send a chill through everyone around him. He started wearing a black cloak and a mask to school, even though no one asked him to. But no one dared say a word about it. I remember that day. It was a freezing cold day at the end of October. I was on my way to school when I saw something strange outside the school grounds. A group of police officers were gathered around a car, and not far away, I saw ambulances parked. I didn't think much of it at first, just assumed something had happened. But when I entered the classroom, the atmosphere felt heavier than usual. The other students were whispering, their eyes wide as if they had just witnessed something terrifying. The whole class was silent, and I felt something was wrong. Eventually, I heard a story I would never forget. William had gone missing that morning. No one had seen him in class, but that wasn't something that worried me. He often missed school for various reasons, but by the afternoon, the news broke. William had put on a black cloak and mask and went out with a gun. He went through the neighborhood, entering each house, saying nothing, just shooting random strangers. The first victim was Mr. Jack, who lived at the end of the street, an old family friend. Then came Lana, the owner of the grocery store near the school. Both were dead on the spot. The news spread like wildfire. Posts began appearing on social media, filled with hints that William had been planning this for weeks. He had shared his thoughts in recent weeks, all full of signs of desperation and anger. He had warned people, but no one listened. His posts were ignored. He had been abandoned, pushed to the edge, and now he had found a way to get his revenge. When I heard the story, a cold shiver ran down my spine. I remembered the times I had seen William, the times I had tried to be friendly with him, but he always rejected me. I remembered feeling sorry for him, but now I felt guilty because I hadn't seen the danger signs earlier. It was a cruelty I couldn't understand. The scene I witnessed when I walked out of the school that day is still burned into my memory. Ambulances were preparing to take the victims away, police officers were securing the scene, and people were buzzing with chaos. Then I saw him. William was standing far off, facing us, a shadow standing silently among the bright lights. He looked at me with an empty stare, no emotion in his eyes. I could feel the pain in his gaze, but also a challenge from someone who had lost all hope in this world. He didn't run, didn't try to hide what he had done. William just stood there like a ghost, watching everything around him. Since that day, I've never seen William again. But I always feel like a part of him is still there. His whispers, his eerie laughter, and that gaze still haunt me. A story full of overlooked signs, a tragedy that, if only we had paid more attention, might not have happened. But it was all too late. Now all I have left are the memories of William, a former friend, a person abandoned by the world, and a ghost in my life. He became a nightmare I could never shake. Story 2, The Silent Ghost. We never imagined that a classmate could become a terrifying, haunting presence throughout our high school years. That classmate was Caleb, a new student who transferred to 10th grade at Milton High School, a small town in the western United States. No one knew much about his past, and he never opened up to anyone. But there was one thing that was certain. Caleb always had a strange habit that none of us could explain. It all started when I first noticed Caleb in class. He wasn't like the other students. While everyone else was chatting, telling jokes, or participating in group activities, Caleb remained silent. He sat by himself, his eyes fixed on some distant point. He would often whisper to himself, but not to anyone around him. At first, Caleb's whispers just seemed like some meaningless mumbling, something I thought was a normal habit for a new student. But as time went on, Caleb's behavior became more and more strange. He didn't just whisper when alone, he whispered even when there were people around. His words sounded like he was speaking to someone, but there was no one there. At first, I thought it was just some odd habit of someone who spends too much time lost in their thoughts. But when I saw Caleb repeating these strange sentences with a tense, fearful expression, I began to feel uneasy. One day during a history class, we were all sitting around talking as usual, when suddenly Caleb stood up and told us he was talking to his mother. We all exchanged looks, stunned and unable to understand what he meant. Caleb admitted that his mother had passed away, but whenever he felt scared or lonely, he would hear her voice whispering to him. This revelation was both shocking and deeply unsettling. We didn't know how to react to Caleb's words. He said that his mother had committed suicide several years ago, and since then, he felt like she was still there, always watching and talking to him. His words left us speechless, and no one knew what to say. But deep down, I couldn't shake the eerie feeling that crept over me. People started avoiding Caleb, as if he carried with him something dark and dangerous. From that point on, I no longer saw Caleb as just a classmate. His actions and words grew more bizarre and incomprehensible. He would frequently whisper during silent moments in class, sometimes muttering to himself in the hallways, where no one dared approach him. The other students mocked him and avoided him, never paying attention to the strange signs he was going through. We didn't realize that these strange actions were the consequences of a deep tragedy Caleb had been living with for years. Then one day in the middle of winter, something horrifying happened. I remember that day clearly. It was cold and foggy. As I walked into school, I immediately sensed something was wrong. The anxious looks on the students' faces made me feel uneasy. I entered the classroom, and the first thing I noticed was that Caleb was absent. This was odd because he was always there, even if he just sat quietly. But today, he was nowhere to be found. As the class continued, I overheard whispers from the students around me. A few friends said that Caleb had skipped school that morning and never came to class. They said he had faded into the darkness of his own world and never returned. The whispers we used to hear from him now seemed less like a joke and more like warnings from a soul that was falling apart. After school, I went home and saw the news on social media. People were sharing a chilling story about Caleb, about a strange phone call from a police officer. Caleb had been found in an abandoned house on the outskirts of the city, where police officers and investigators were faced with a horrifying scene. Authorities discovered that Caleb had set up a secret room filled with old photos and notes about his mother. But the most terrifying part was the whispers Caleb had been hearing, the voice of his deceased mother. When the police found him, Caleb was sitting silently in the dark, holding a photo of his mother. In his hand was a pair of scissors, and there were signs of self-destructive behavior. Caleb was no longer the student I once knew. He had become a living ghost, unable to escape the whispers of his mother, unable to move on from the scars she had left. What terrified me the most was the last entry Caleb wrote in his journal. He wrote, "Mom hasn't left me. She's still here, and she's telling me I have to do what she says." He wasn't just a person haunted by the past. He had been pulled into a world he couldn't escape. After that event, everything in the town of Milton changed. Stories about Caleb and the strange things he went through became the talk of the town. But what scared me the most was that I couldn't forget Caleb's face, the face of someone trapped between reality and the world of ghosts. And every night I hear those whispers, as if Caleb is still out there, still talking to his mother, still trapped in a dark world he cannot escape. Caleb's story isn't just a story of loneliness, but a warning about the unseen emotional scars, the ghosts we can't perceive. Story 3, The Bloody Plan. I never thought that a shy student like Ethan could completely change and become a notorious criminal. Ethan, a classmate of mine, was always quiet and never drew attention to himself. He wasn't the kind of person who participated in lively conversations or stood out in a crowd. In fact, he always sat quietly in the back of the classroom, his eyes often lost in deep thought. At first, I thought Ethan was just an insecure student, someone who didn't want to fit in with everyone else. But that was the last mistake I made. In November of our senior year, Ethan suddenly became famous, but not for any good reason. His name started appearing all over the media, but not as a model student or a friendly peer. Instead, it was because of a horrific crime he committed. It all started with a simple plan, a robbery. Ethan and a close friend of his, Max, devised a plan to steal money from another student named James, who had recently inherited a large sum of money from his family. Everything seemed too easy for them, a simple plan, an easy target. But no one could have imagined that a small incident could escalate into such an unimaginable crime. One autumn evening, Ethan and Max put their plan into action. They tracked James, then found a way to lure him to a secluded location outside the city. But things didn't stop there. Ethan, someone I had once thought was weak and easily manipulated, did something no one could have foreseen. When James refused to hand over the inheritance money, Ethan deliberately stabbed him without hesitation. Max tried to stop him, but Ethan couldn't control himself. He killed James on the spot, but it didn't end with the murder. Ethan brutally mutilated James's body, doing things I could never have imagined. He used a sharp knife to sever James's head. And then, the most shocking part, Ethan tried to make the severed head speak like a puppet. He mocked the body of an old friend as if life and death meant nothing to him. Ethan's actions truly horrified me, and I couldn't understand how someone I had known could turn into such a monster. When the police arrived at the scene, they discovered the atrocities Ethan and Max had committed. It was hard to believe the news, but there was no denying the truth. Ethan and Max were arrested immediately. This case became one of the most horrific in the city's history, and Ethan's name became a haunting presence to everyone. His story left the community stunned, and no one could understand the motive behind his brutal actions. Throughout the trial, Ethan's coldness made everyone present unable to believe their eyes. He sat there in silence, showing no emotion, even though all the evidence was against him. Ethan didn't show any remorse or regret. He didn't cry, didn't apologize, and didn't care about what was happening around him. His gaze remained as cold as ever, showing no sign of guilt or fear. This left everyone in the courtroom feeling disturbed and haunted. He wasn't just a normal murderer. He was a person who had hidden under the facade of a shy student, only to reveal his cruel nature in the end. In the end, Ethan was sentenced to prison for murder. But no matter what punishment he faced, the truth was that James's death and everything Ethan had done would haunt me and everyone who had known him forever. I could never forget the image of Ethan, a student I once thought harmless, who had now become a terrifying criminal. His actions made me realize that sometimes the people we think are the most harmless can turn out to be the most brutal killers, and the small signs in their lives can be a warning we never recognize in time. And every time I think back, I can't help but ask myself a big question. Do we truly understand what's going on in the minds of the people around us, or do we simply overlook it until it's too late?